Hey, everybody, welcome back to I Know a Guy. I'm Anthony, and this is the podcast where connections thrive. Each episode, we spotlight inspiring entrepreneurs, professionals, and individuals doing amazing things. Together, we'll grow your circle, spark collaborations, and discover new opportunities. Today, we're meeting Dr. Evelyn Higgins, the founder and CEO of Pillar Health Systems, is a renowned international expert in health and wellness with a career spanning pain management, addictionology, and groundbreaking work in epigenetics and neuroscience. Dr. Higgins has advised the U.S. Surgeon General, served as an Olympic team doctor, and earn accolades like Modern Healthcare's top 25 innovators in the healthcare nomination. How are you doing today, Dr. Higgins?
I am great, Anthony. Pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, I was happy to have you. I read your bio and everything about you. I'm like, oh man, she's done awesome things. I'm gonna have to just ask all the questions. So I was excited to have you on. So to
Cool.
start off, where are you located? What are you doing? Where are you at?
So I'm in South Florida. Our headquarters is in Jupiter, which is Palm Beach County. And I've been in healthcare for 35, 36 years. And my career kind of transcended from practice and pain management, integrative medicine to addictionology, mental health, behavioral health, and including that because of personal reasons as well as professional reasons, but also seeing that technology has changed and we need to use it in this area. Every other area of healthcare, Anthony, employs diagnostics, the latest and greatest that we figured out in science and technology, and kind of in this area with general wellness, with mental health, with the addiction area, we're stagnant. We're not using everything that's available to us.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it seems like the technology aspect, it's all accelerating. So there's more to learn quicker too.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but to backtrack just a little bit, so South Florida, are you originally from the area or are you newer to it?
No, originally from New York, grew up on Long Island, and then was in Atlanta for Georgia, specifically Atlanta for better of 25 years,
Okay.
and then Florida.
Okay, awesome. So people that are coming to visit you, let's say you have some friends coming in that have never visited, where are you going to take them? What are you doing for fun and where are you taking them to eat?
Good questions. There's so many great restaurants here. There's 1000 North, there's Guanabana, there's the Pelican Club, there's Thirsty Turtle. There's there's really good restaurants, and the beach is right here too. So typically there's no shortage of friends wanting to visit. Yeah, so really, really fun area.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I've been to Florida a few times, always had a good time. Never made it to South Florida though. It's always
Mhm.
been like your Panama. I think the furthest south I got was, I don't know what's more south. No, probably St. Augustine. So never made it all
Okay,
the way down
that's
there.
still north. Yeah,
But
yeah.
uh, but yeah, awesome. Well, you mentioned a little bit about what you're doing, but you said you've been in it for 35 years.
Mhm.
What got you started? Have you always been like healthcare is where I'm going, I'm going to figure it out, or did you have a path you were trying to follow?
Actually, when I first started college, I was in marine biology, oceanography. Was in a really bad car accident and fractured my hip in 5 places and laid on my back for 30 days in the hospital, which kind of had me start thinking about my body healing. I'm here for a month. There's anything anybody can do for me other than let my body heal. And that kind of segued whole new thoughts, what I wanted to do. And then from there, so it was pain management, physical medicine, and then started to see the tools not being available of what was being used. And as technology, as I said earlier, was rapidly accelerating, we weren't using it within healthcare. And then really we started in R&D in what we do 19 years ago. And that started by looking at brain chemicals, neurotransmitters, hormones, their interactions together. But that was cutting edge at that time. People were not using the word like serotonin or dopamine the way, I wouldn't say it's a common term, but a lot of people like, oh, yeah, I know what that is because there's so many SSRIs on the market, right? Or antidepressants. So they know serotonin. But 19 years ago, no one knew what those words were. And then it was only the tail end of 2015, the technology became available to look at the genetic, what we call SNPs, or a polymorphism, where there's a variant or an error in someone's genetic coding. So this continued to wow, max speed. But what I was finding within healthcare was it was status quo, business as usual. This is what we're doing. We're basing people on vocabulary. We're giving them something to take and hoping it works. When we had figured out so much more to remove the hope part of things and say, objectively, we now know the blueprint for you. We know what your genes are. We know where your strengths are. We know where your weaknesses are. So doesn't it make sense to have a game plan for you, uniquely you, instead of the next guy that walks in the door after you?
Yeah, that's interesting because we don't expect that in any other area of our lives. If you're bringing a car to a mechanic, for instance, they're going to look up your car specs, right? They're not going to go in
Right.
assuming there's going to be
Right.
the basics, right? You have to have an engine, but they're not going to assume that you're working on the Kia the same way you're working on an F-250, right? There's going to be
Right.
differences. So that's interesting. So you started seeing that, healthcare wasn't keeping up with technology. What was the first kind of success that you had that you're like, okay, we brought kind of your goal, bringing the newer technology to healthcare. What was that first success like?
Oh gosh, there have been so many. I don't even know what was first, but I'll just share a couple of cases that you shake your head. Um, a child who was 4 at the time, who's now 8 years old, and was born what we call neonatal alcohol syndrome and addicted to methamphetamines, cocaine in their system, an infant born. Codes at the hospital on the APGAR, like when a baby's born, they should have scoring that, and her scoring was less than half of what it should be. Not thriving, to say the least. She's in the foster system. She's adopted by the family. Now we're seeing her at 4 years old, and she's getting kicked out of schools already. Her life is difficult for herself, for everybody around her, because the way she came into the world, addicted already. I mean, that's an uphill battle. So we did everything that we do at Wired for Addiction and Wired Biohealth, looking at her specific unique makeup and what we needed to do after getting samples of her DNA. Okay, what do we need to do to optimize this child? And we did that to the point where she is a totally different kid. Actually, I even used this case when I presented in Abu Dhabi at the International Society. Um, she, at the end of the school year, won the Character of School award, like beyond change, and you think about how many lives she's going to affect positively in her life because she's so young, right? Or had she stayed on that track of how many lives she would have potentially interrupted on that same track. Another story, a now 64-year-old, major depressive disorder, 30 years of trying everything known to man to get better, from medications to therapies and everything. Family history of mental health concerns. Father alcoholic, son took his own life. So a lot going on there genetically. We had her do the labs. She came to us. We did the labs. Came up with recommendations. Worked with the psychiatrist she was already working with. Said, we want to add this to the plan. Here you go. Thriving. In fact, she actually recently got married. I was joking around with her saying I wanted to be the bridesmaid because it's like her life literally totally changed. And, that's just 2 stories. And I could go on with the stories, Anthony. But the thing is, if you think about it in the big picture, there's over 8 billion people in the world with 8 billion different sets of DNA, yet we're treating everyone as if they're that exactly the same. And then we wonder why we don't get the results. Kind of the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We're not going to get a different result if we don't even know with objective scientific validity what we're going after. We're throwing a dart.
Yeah, I get that. So that was some of your earlier successes, and as things go, you said like we mentioned before, things start to accelerate. Technology comes
Sure.
in. What are some things on the horizon that you're looking at going, this could be a game changer, or once we implement this, it's going to solve XYZ problem?
Sure. So right now is still what we do is out of pocket for people. We had one of the largest insurance carriers in the nation come to us to say, we have 9,000 lives. We'd like to do a pilot program with you because we know the efficacy of what you're talking about. We want to show it because then we can cover it, and then it's a business, right? So other insurance companies going to say, well, we have to cover it too if they're covering it, or else people are going to switch to them. That's unheard of, Anthony. Insurance companies don't go to you saying, hey, we want to be able to add this. Let's do this together. So that's really, really exciting. It takes time. I did a TED talk, understanding the biomarkers of addiction. And one of my lines in there is it takes time for people to learn to think a new way, right? So that's not going to be overnight, but the fact that it's moving in that direction. I mean, even when the BRCA gene for breast cancer came out, that was out of pocket. That wasn't paid for by insurance. It took years. That's hard to believe now, but it took years until that was covered. But the fact that the conversation's begun and we're getting there, and we can prevent so much. We can optimize what we've got to work with. It's a game changer for people. Just alone, one of the genes that we look at would tell us if an SSRI, an antidepressant, would be effective for an individual. Well, I can't tell you the amount of people that come to us that have been on SSRIs for decades, 2, 3 plus decades. First off, an antidepressant, an SSRI, was never meant to be used in a chronic situation. It was meant for an acute situation. Hey, life happened. It's a really hard time right now. Let's get you over this hurdle. Take this for the next period of time. They were never meant to be lived on in perpetuity, but that's what's happening. So we see people that come in, yeah, been on an SSRIs, the gamut. Try this one, try this one, try this one, double it, half it, yada, yada. And their serotonin is still in the tank when it's measured, knowing that we know it was never going to work on them because we've looked at this gene for them and said this was never going to be effective to begin with, but no one took the deeper dive. Now, in fairness, it wasn't always available, right? But it is now. No one took the deeper dive to say, this is why you're not feeling better. What happens is almost like the patient gets somewhat gaslighted by the doctor saying, hey, this works, and we know it does. So this is you wanting to be this way, can't help you anymore kind of thing. Emotionally, that destroys that individual to say, this is me just trying to be me and make my life harder. Doesn't make sense. So that kind of thing. People say, like, where do you want to see this in 5 or 10 years? I want to see it like a CBC. When you go to your physician for your yearly, right? Let's do some blood, complete blood count. Let's see your white blood cells, your red blood cells, all that kind of stuff. See if you're healthy, big picture. This is a one-time test because it's your DNA. So to know where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, it should be something that everybody does because we all have. Some people think they don't have any weaknesses, right? We all know them, but everybody does. There's nobody that's got the perfect genome. And then the most exciting part of science today, I believe, is something called epigenetics. So your DNA, here's your cards, play them out, Anthony. Good luck to you. We now know that with epigenetics, what we can change is the expression of those genes. That is huge. And that gives the power back to the individual.
Can you give us an example of that actually working?
Sure. Start with we look at methylation genes, 14 of them. Like a test, like people say, well, like I had 23andMe and they looked at the MTHFR. I'm like, that's one gene. We're looking at 14. That's what I would call a recreational test versus what we're doing a clinical test. That can become misleading to say, you're all green light on that one, but the other 13, right? So methylation, really complex process in your body. But if I were to break it down to say, summary, this is what methylation does. 1, it optimizes your DNA. That alone, we need to be methylating, hands down. It allows you to detoxify normally. Every day we're assaulted with toxins. Our body every day eliminates if that's working. The hardest work your liver does is between 2 and 4 a.m., processing all the toxins out. And then lastly, it helps us absorb nutrients. We could be eating the perfect diet, but if we're not absorbing, we're not getting the nutrients we need, we are not going to be healthy. So that one process, just that one thing, we look at 85 different biomarkers, but just saying that one process of methylation That's a game changer for people.
Okay, I got you. So when I was reading earlier, it sounded like epigenetics and neuroscience kind of go hand in hand a little bit. How does that overlap? Because epigenetics, like you said, is kind of how it's being. I may be wrong as a layman, but neuroscience, obviously, you're talking about brain chemistry and the like. How
Right.
does that working?
So neuroscience would be the big umbrella. Epigenetics would be the work that we do. Okay, so let's say in neuropsych, one of the genes that we measure is called the GAD gene, glutamic acid decarboxylase. The job of that is to convert GABA, is to convert glutamic acid, a stimulant neurotransmitter, to GABA, a calming neurotransmitter. So you talk about someone that's always in the state of anxiety, they're never getting to calm. Unless we make that pathway optimal, that's never going to change. They could be on benzos for the rest of their life. We're not changing and turning those genes on or off, depending on the case of whatever needs to be done. So taking some like really heavy duty science, but boiling it down to be like, what we're changing is the expression of that. And somebody that suffers with anxiety, that's debilitating. That's debilitating for people. So, and we don't know, you could be labeled with anxiety, but where are the biomarkers? Where's the scientific validity of what we're talking about? It's a vocabulary word from someone observing you and saying, here's what I think is going on. And that's why we're off the mark on so many of these cases. When we talk about post-pandemic, Kaiser study came out with 53% of the society has been diagnosed with anxiety and or depression. Diagnosed. If we talk about the undiagnosed added onto that, we're easy north of 70+%. That's an incredible number. But if you're out there in the world interacting with people, that's not shocking, knowing how people are treating each other, right? Not shocking, but we're not doing anything effectively to change it. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation if what we were doing was working.
No, absolutely. A lot of us, like you mentioned, a lot of people deal with stuff. It might have been diagnosed, it might have been undiagnosed that they're still dealing with it, and it might be different markers that they could be finding stuff out about themselves. Where it's like, this isn't going to work for me. I've been taking it for 30 years. Why am I still taking it? How do people discover this? You said this is newer. You're being approached by insurance companies. For your average Joe out there, that's like, this is all interesting, but how is it going to affect my day-to-day life? What's that going to look like moving forward?
Sure. So several different categories, as I said, of genes that we look at. We look at inflammatory genes, as we know, systemic inflammation, real big part of diseases and conditions moving forward, right? We look at detoxification. We look at something called autophagy, which is kind of like the garbage man of your cells. We look at those neuropsych genes. We look at the genes related to mitochondria, how your body makes energy. So let's use the example. Someone's really down in the dumps or like, ah, man, I just don't, I'm Anthony and I used to love doing my podcast and now I have no excitement over it. So it would be like, well, do we have to look at serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine? Do we have to look at mitochondria? Because if you're not making energy, you're going to really feel down. Or is it all of them, right? So it allows us to stop guessing of what's happening with someone and jump in and say, here's a plan just as unique as you are, as your DNA is, to optimize everything that you've got to work with. It's a game changer.
Okay. So, what advice would you have for somebody that's looking to manage pain and improve their well-being without relying on traditional methods?
Sure. So I would definitely say do this lab test with us Wired Biohealth, because even just the inflammatory markers alone, what those do to pain, that autophagy that I talked about, that garbage, if we're not removing the garbage from someone's body, it stays in there and affects all those cells, right? So the energy creation or lack thereof, the neuropsych genes obviously are going to come into pain. So all of these together would be something we have to look at. It's that, and here's why people don't get the results that we're after, because we want to make it a single molecule problem with a single molecule answer, and we're way more complicated than that. There are so many layers.
That's accurate. Yeah. We all know going in that it's complicated and we're expecting an easy fix.
Yeah,
And that historically has not been the case. So why are we
exactly.
surprised? So, you mentioned epigenetics and neurosciences. How can they transform our approach to health and wellness?
Sure. So again, use the term game changer. We can prevent so much of disease and conditions before we get there. We can optimize what every individual has to work with. We can say, already what you're doing is, it's not bad, but it's not good. Why? What are we missing? What elements haven't we looked at and we haven't uncovered to see what's happening? You put all these pieces together, we have a much healthier individual whose quality of life, most importantly, is as good as it can be.
Okay. And then how has your experience as an Olympic team doctor influenced your perspective on health and performance?
Sure. So performance, like to reach that point of being a world-class athlete, there's a lot of really good athletes, and we get to here, and then there's that little piece above it, and that's where the best of the best are. And, that peak performance, we have to be looking at all of these different systems of our body to have everything as optimal as it can be. It's all of those, talking about layers, right? It's all of the layers that are going to come into play here to have somebody operating at peak. And, athletes obviously have to be working that way, but even individuals who are like, I want the most out of my life. You see, like business guys like yourself, entrepreneurs, really like, I want to get the most out of every day and my life. And I've got to be I've got to be operating optimally. Of course, this is going to make you the best you. This is going to make you optimal in every single area. You're going to function better and it's going to show in each aspect of your life. And then beyond that, just allowing somebody increased longevity as a result is, so you're doing really good in life. Don't you want to have more of it? you know?
Yeah, and you see that with top performing athletes and people of that caliber where, like you said, they're throwing everything at it. They have
Yep.
their different treatments, they have their specific workouts, they're having one-on-one attention for things from, the
Yep.
doctors or coaches, whatever it is, and they're going hyper specific on all areas. And all we're really looking as just the general population is a little bit of that because it's going to
Yeah,
be
exactly.
hugely impactful. Where there's a reason that they do that. There's a reason that it takes all effort on all areas to make them the best possible. And if we want to feel anywhere better, we probably need to get a little bit more individualized, like they're doing to the maximum. So it makes perfect sense.
Yep.
So awesome. Well, is there anything that I missed or failed to ask that you wanted to add?
No, I think that really covered. I hope your listeners have a, just kind of a really big, high level idea of what's available today, and if it interests you, you can go to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our newsletters at Wired Biohealth or Wired for Addiction. Even schedule a complimentary consultation to say, hey, this sounded really interesting. This is what's going on with me. Would this be something for me? Or would you point me in another direction? Um, One of my books, Dr. Higgins' Guide to Health and Wellness, goes into this a little bit. So much more has happened since then, but a good read just to have a good overview. But really, if this resonates with you, I'd say look into it because there's so much more that can be done for people that we're not doing. And just the big idea of we're not all the same, but we're treating everybody the same and then we're not getting the results.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Is that the best place they find you then? Is your website and your YouTube?
Yeah, so wiredbiohealth.com or wiredforaddiction.com, those two websites. Take a look, peruse through there, set up a complimentary consultation, talk with myself or one of our wellness consultants, and that's a really good place to start.
Perfect. Absolutely. And I'll put all that in the show notes so people don't have to hunt for
Cool.
it. I think you've already sent it to me, so I'm going to copy and paste it over. So if it's misspelled, it's your fault, not mine. Um, but perfect.
Good.
If anybody would like to get in a hold of Dr. Higgins, absolutely do it. It's your health, right? You live through it every single day. It's the biggest part of what you're dealing with because whether you're at work or you're at leisure, you're whatever it is, your health is there with you. So you want to optimize that at least as much as you can. So absolutely reach out. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can find us at ikag.me. You can find more episodes, subscribe to newsletter, meet more awesome people like Dr. Higgins, and connect with a growing community. If you or somebody you know would like to be interviewed, you could also apply on the website. But Dr. Higgins, I really appreciate you taking the time and having this conversation with us. It's kind of exciting seeing what's happened. What's up until now seemed like science fiction is kind of just
Yeah.
happening.
Yep.
So it's
Yeah.
really awesome to live through and to see. So really awesome. Appreciate you coming on. Let's all go out, have an awesome day and grow our circle. All right.
Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate you and what you're doing.
My pleasure.